Okay, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Michael Bellicosa, Community Engagement Manager at Wilton Library. On behalf of our Executive Director, Caroline Mandler, and all of us at the library and the Historical Society, welcome to our fifth and final lecture in this year's five-part scholarly lecture series. This series marks the 15th year of Wilton Library's collaboration with the Wilton Historical Society, and we do so enjoy working with our friends and colleagues there to put this series together each year. I would like to thank our sponsors of today's lecture, Nancy and Bill Browdigam, and thank you as well to those of you who made the suggested donation at the time of registration. Finally, let me thank our collaborators, the members of our planning committee, for all their time and effort in developing the theme of the series, the individual lecture topics, and of course, securing the speakers. One logistic note, we'll deal with questions at the end of the lecture. Please use the Q&A button to submit those questions so that our panelists will see them there rather than the chat button. Use the Q&A button. So with that, let's get to the introduction of today's speaker. And to do that, I'll turn over our online podium to today's moderator, Max Gabrielson. Max?
Thank you, Michael. Previous lectures in our Tycoons, Banes, or Benefactors series have explored the lives and achievements of Nicholas Biddle, John Pierpont Morgan, Henry Ford, and Mark Zuckerberg. Today, we will conclude with an encore lecture that will bring our series theme into a culminating focus. Our speaker today is Matt Warshauer, a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, his undergraduate alma mater. A specialist in early 19th century political history, Matt has written and presented extensively on Jacksonian America, the rise and demise of political parties, the history of slavery and sectionalism, and the Civil War. From 2011 to 2015, he served as the co-chair of the Connecticut Civil War Commemoration Commission, which devoted itself to educating both the public and history professionals about Connecticut's important and often singular Civil War experience. There is no time in the state's history that more original research and publication has been conducted on Connecticut and the Civil War than during the commemoration. In recent years, Warshauer has turned his attention to 9/11 with the realization that an entire generation is coming of age who have no memory of the attacks, yet have nonetheless grown up in the shadow of towers that no longer exist. His forthcoming book, Free Fall, Creating and Failing the 9/11 Generation, explores this important history and attempts to explain why America is at the lowest point of its almost 250-year history. The Wilton Library and the Historical Society are so grateful for the warm and collegial relationship we have enjoyed with Matt over the years, for the time he has generously given and the insights he has offered. He brings not simply a deep knowledge of American history, but a passion for the subject and a love of sharing that are the hallmarks of a great teacher. I speak for all of us here today, Matt, when I say how delighted we are that you are with us again and how fortunate we are to be your students this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming Matt Warshauer for the final lecture of our series, The Perils of Great Men, Business, Ideology, and Questions about Capitalism.
Thank you, Max. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are all enjoying what is a beautiful day in Connecticut. We're starting to come out of winter, which is a nice thing. This series has extended from the, it's actually paralleled the demise of winter and the rise of spring, which is a nice thing. So let me see if I can wrap up this series for us. I know we've been a little bit spread out, and perhaps we've you maybe forgotten a little bit about some of what we went over. So I'm going to take a little bit of time, and I'm going to show you a PowerPoint that brings us through the four different talks that we have spoken about, and then we'll have a little introduction to on where at least I think some of this leads us and raises some questions about where we are in America today. So our focal point, what was created by Wilton Historical Society and Library was this idea of tycoons, Bane or benefactors. And one of the things that I thought about as I was listening to all the various talks and putting together my notes for this final talk was, all of our quote unquote great men stories as tycoons revolve around whether their visions for business corresponded with benefits to workers and the people. In essence, do the nation's leading capitalists owe anything to society? And that is a fundamental question that has existed within every single one of our talks, and has been one of the, I think, one of the issues that has revolved around the very nature of capitalism in American society. And so we began with my first talk, which was The Bank is Trying to Kill Me, but I Will Kill It. And it's Nicholas Biddle's war with Andrew Jackson. Jackson questioned the bank's stability and the safety of federal deposits. He questioned the bank's economic power. He questioned the bank's involvement in politics. He famously said that it was a monopoly of its favor and support, and said it seems to be predicated on the erroneous idea that the present stockholders have a prescriptive right, not only to the favor, but to the bounty of government. And then Jackson famously said, "It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the axe of government to their selfish purposes." So what does Jackson do? He vetoes the Bank of the United States, and his veto message is seen by many as a great blow against monopoly and against the money power. And this veto message that Jackson delivers, he uses specifically several times. He uses the word monopoly, and it's one of really the first times in presidential history where the idea of a business monopoly existing, that its very existence harms the people themselves and harms the government. And it's one of the many reasons that Jackson was seen as a man of the common people, or what often the period is referred to as the age of Jacksonian democracy. And years later, Jackson is embraced by the Democratic Party of the 1930s as a defender of the public good. So it's not just that Jackson has this period of time where he is fighting on behalf of what some believed was the common man against the wealthy and the powerful. It's that other Democrats later on, especially Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they embraced Jackson. So too did Teddy Roosevelt, as a harbinger of what democracy was supposed to mean. Now, one of the remarkable aspects of all of this is that Jackson was very much a capitalist. He was, from an early time in his life, a man on the make. He wanted all the capitalist opportunities that anyone in the nation could get their hands on, and he wanted to make a lot of money. He actually wanted to be an aristocrat. And what turns him towards, what we would refer to today as small d democracy is not actually economic issues, but the attempt, what he believed was an attempt to steal the presidency from him in 1824. And Jackson becomes a very small d Democrat as a result of that. He has a really serious skepticism towards paper money. And he's got real concerns. Doesn't have concerns over the idea of credit and monetary exchange. It's over paper money versus hard money. We talked a little bit about this during my talk. So, Jackson is one of these early times when America is, by the 1820s, 1830s, America has really made the shift from being what was primarily an agriculturally based society to one that is very quickly moving towards a market-oriented economic system, which is it's the precursor to an industrial revolution. It's the precursor to what we would consider modern capitalism. We then went into J.P. Morgan, An American Aristocrat by Susan Berfield. She focused on the idea that Morgan very much believed in self-regulation rather than government, meaning that the business owners themselves could regulate. And this reminds us of, what is often argued today, that the market can regulate itself, that it doesn't need government to regulate it, that government regulation is in fact interference and is anti-American and anti-capitalist. Though Morgan was fine with the government working on behalf of big business, for example, when it provides lots and lots of land for the growth of the railroad. So if it was within Morgan's business interest, he had no problem with the government acting, but he certainly didn't want government to be doing anything that could in any way regulate or get in the way of his own business interests. She explained, Susan Berfield explained that Morgan didn't understand antagonism towards the wealthy, that he believed that the wealthy were a key linchpin of any society. He believed that he alone could protect American interests. And he, in fact, had enough money and enough economic power, that he did, in fact, protect American interests in the fact that he twice acted as a central bank and bailed out the government when it ran out of money. And so what Susan Berfield, one of the things she concluded is that, Morgan created a legacy of extremely concentrated wealth, a rather strange philanthropy, and a distinct disdain for social justice. So J.P. Morgan was, as the title suggested, was a true American aristocrat and believed that aristocracy should in fact exist. But along comes Teddy Roosevelt, also a part of Susan Berfield's talk, and he puts in place the Sherman Antitrust Act. Morgan lost the ability to conduct business as he thought best because the Antitrust Act that, the Sherman Antitrust Act is passed before Teddy Roosevelt becomes president of the United States, but he utilizes it in a way that no previous president had done. And his idea was, you can see the quote at the bottom, he says, America must not be the civilization of a mere plutocracy. So he's looking at the aristocrats of the business world, those who are working almost solely and primarily in their own interests and not towards the interest of the public good. Roosevelt sees that as a real problem. Morgan didn't understand that. He believed that his interests and that he understood what the nation needed and that aristocracy was a good thing. And therefore, he looked at what Roosevelt was doing and really didn't like it. So Morgan lost the ability to conduct business as he thought best because of these new regulations that were put in place to allow government to step in and stop some of the worst elements of American capitalism, and a sort of rapacious capitalism at that. And, a perfect example of this is in the Great Coal Strike. Morgan believed that Roosevelt should prosecute the coal unions and the workers. And prior to the progressive era with Roosevelt coming in, generally speaking, when there were union actions and there were walkouts or strikes, the government always did fall in on the side of big business. And Roosevelt doesn't do this. He comes to the presidency with a sort of a new vision of what the presidential office should be and how government should be a partner in business and controlling elements of business. So he creates what becomes known as the square deal. And why? Because a square is equal on all sides. And he gives something in this coal strike with the square deal. He gives something to the coal owners, but he also gives something to the workers because he sees that this almost exclusive use of government for the protection of big business is not good for the people themselves, and certainly isn't good for the workers, and especially with the shift in American society, especially in the aftermath of the American Civil War, where we really move from a market-oriented system towards an industrial system, and a mass exodus from agricultural and rural areas into large cities. Roosevelt sees that something must be done because the effects, the negative effects of capitalism are so striking on American society. And Roosevelt sees Morgan in another way also. He sees Morgan's government bailouts as, in many ways, as Jackson did. He sees, Jackson saw in Nicholas Biddle and the Bank of the United States that extensive power that the bank had over the American economy and over American politics. It worried Jackson, and it's one of the reasons that he vetoes the bank bill. Well, Roosevelt sees Morgan's ability to and a need, even a need to bail out the economy. He sees Morgan's ability to provide this government bailout as a red flag, and the need for a new financial system and the creation of a Federal Reserve. Now, that of course doesn't come in Roosevelt's time. It comes as another component, another chapter of the progressive era under Woodrow Wilson. But Roosevelt sees the need for a new economic order that is a larger part of his progressivism. And Morgan never understood what I think Roosevelt really did. And that question is that Morgan didn't understand was the great progressive era question. Should we pursue reform or should we face revolution? Because this is one of the really big things that Roosevelt understands that others don't. Because there are so many really massive changes that are occurring in the 1870s and 1880s and 1890s in the lifestyle of America, especially in the lifestyle of the American worker, with this, as I said, this mass exodus from agricultural and from rural regions, the extensive rise of American cities, this massive unskilled workforce, and a lot of the problems that come with the rise of the cities and the rise of these unskilled workers. Something needs to be done about it. And there are an awful lot of people, their solution is to turn directly away from capitalism. And this is really the time of the rise of Karl Marx and ideas about socialism and communism and the struggle between the workers, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie or the owners. And there's a big push, there's a large movement towards socialism and communism and anarchy in the United States. And there is labor violence occurring. And Roosevelt we have to remember, he's not reactionary against big business. He's actually quite pro big business. He's just anti-socialism. And he realizes, and this is what Morgan doesn't understand, and that I think Roosevelt does, is that Roosevelt understands the need to pursue reform in the economic system through government regulation and government ameliorating some of the worst elements of capitalism, because Roosevelt doesn't believe that the capitalists themselves are willing or perhaps capable of doing it. And of course, if you think about what we've been talking about, what Susan Berfield talked about, and what I've been explaining in regards to Morgan, is he doesn't understand. He just doesn't understand it. He comes at it from this very aristocratic, elitist point of view. And I think Roosevelt comes at it from a very small d democratic view and realizes that in order to safeguard the very nature of small r Republican, small d Democratic government, he must engage this new system of reform or potentially face the overthrow of the American system through actual revolution. Because we have to remember that the way at this time, the way that we understand in the late 18th and early 19th century, the way we understand socialism or communism coming into being is in fact through revolution. This is the way that Karl Marx said that it would occur. And Roosevelt sees these dangers as, and it's not just Roosevelt, there's many other people in government, and this is why the progressive era movement is more than just a movement that belongs to one political party or the other. And it doesn't only apply, the idea of reform doesn't only apply to economics, it applies across the spectrum of human existence, because people see so many different difficulties arising in American society, and that as the society and the government become more sophisticated, the society must rely on government more than it has ever done before to help to fix and ameliorate, some of these problems. So we then moved on to Henry Ford's Borrowed Humanity, how the same man lifted and then lost America. And this was delivered to us by Julie Fenster. She talked about the James Cousins, that there was, Henry Ford's Borrowed Humanity. It wasn't Henry Ford's. He wasn't the real humanitarian. Rather, it was James Cousin. He was the man behind the Ford myth. And here you can see that this image that she showed us of Ford and of James Cousins, and that Ford was really the engineer and the mechanic, and liked to be down on the factory floor and was the tinkerer, and he was constantly thinking about how to modify the car and change production. That he used mass production. He didn't invent mass production, but he used it on a very sophisticated product in a way that others hadn't. And he believed that it would change the world. And Ford, as a result of the production of the Ford automobile, he becomes an idol of the people, a sort of folksy benefactor, and that the car became a symbol of the everyman, that Ford wanted anyone to be able to purchase a car. He wanted his own workers to be able to purchase a car, that he didn't want it to be a tool of just, or a symbol of just, the aristocracy, that the egalitarian car, the car was the egalitarian symbol of its time. He wanted to put America on wheels. And it's Cousins, however, who develops the concept of the $5 workday. It's Cousins who develops the idea of profit sharing. And one of the results of this is a real shift in worker productivity, a drop in attrition rates, a reduction in attrition, and a reduction in labor problems. But this was not the work of Henry Ford. This was all the work of James Cousins. And this concept of a $5 workday at the time was unheard of. But what the company ended up getting out of it, not only was in many ways, it was very Rooseveltian, if you think about it, that it was a square deal. Both sides got something out of it. The workers got something out of it, but the increase in productivity and the lack of labor problems for the Ford company were, the other side of the square. Well, as we were just talking about, none of these measures were Ford's. Cousins was the businessman benefactor. It wasn't Ford. Cousins had the ideas, and Ford received the credit. And we also know that they have that Ford and Cousins have a rather massive falling out. And after their fallout, Cousins went into politics and philanthropy, while Ford's true nature actually came to the fore. That Cousins was in many ways the benefactor in a lot of ways to Ford himself, and shielded him from his own worst predilections. And Ford becomes known as a fascist. He becomes known as anti-Semitic. He dropped profit sharing, and as a result, with these problems, there's horrible labor strife in the 1930s Ford factories. And Ford, of course, receives a medal from Nazi Germany. And Ford makes the statement at one point: labor unions are the worst thing that ever struck the earth because they take away a man's independence. And then we moved on to Mark Zuckerberg, the poster child for promise and peril in the tech sector. This was by my colleague in the School of Business at CCSU, Drew Harris, who gave a wonderful profile of the background and what he thought created someone like Mark Zuckerberg, and he insisted to us that it was the result of privileged genius. That yes, Zuckerberg showed tremendous precociousness and talent at a very young age, but he also came from an economic background that allowed for these talents to be distinctly nurtured. And so he had private tutors that helped him to learn how to do code. He ultimately goes to Harvard, which is a place of great privilege. He creates a number of different types of social media platforms, but we of course know him most for Facebook, or now we might refer to it as Meta, but it's still most famous as Facebook. That it is as the product of our times, that in many ways, Facebook is an extension of Generation Z. Drew explained to us that Zuckerberg was always sort of the smartest guy in the room, that he had the smartest guy in the room syndrome, that everyone should see things the way that he does. And if we think back to Morgan, I think there's something in common there, right? Morgan had a belief that he knew what was best and that he could solve the problems for America and that people should just listen to what he has to say. And so I think there's some real crossover there with these concepts of the smartest guy in the room. Zuckerberg has a net worth today of $75 billion. And he famously says that Facebook is merely a platform, not the arbiter of truth. And why does this quote stand out so much? Simply because we know, especially over the last 6 to 7 years, and certainly leading into the election of 2016, just how powerful a social platform and a political platform that Facebook becomes. And because there are no real regulations on it, people are able to put out really whatever kinds of information that they want on this platform. And so Zuckerberg's statement that it's only a platform, not the arbiter of truth, he is brought before multiple congressional hearings in which Congress are asking Zuckerberg, do you not bear some responsibility for what Facebook puts out there? And Zuckerberg's initial answer to this is, you can see the quote there, that no, he doesn't. And he's one of the things Zuckerberg wants to hold off government from doing is going too far or getting too far into the regulation of social media, because this could impact his own business model, much the way that Morgan didn't like antitrust legislation because it interferes with Morgan's business model. So, but Zuckerberg is slowly being forced to come to grips with the fact, and he already knew this, that the power of Facebook as a social platform, just inside the United States, it has tremendous sway over the kinds of news people see because of these algorithms it uses to create user profiles so that only certain types of information come onto people's screens. Drew did mention briefly the even greater impact that Facebook has in foreign countries, where it ends up in many circumstances being the only source of news for many, many places, and a way to rally people. And really radical stuff goes on in some countries. And as a result, there is a pretty big backlash. Zuckerberg tries to dismiss Facebook's influence on society and politics. He places image and profitability ahead of the public good. We know that he prioritized anger on Facebook because it drove the number of clicks. So all of those, perfect algorithms that he creates to track what's getting people excited, what gets them motivated to be online and using Facebook even more, it's when people are getting angry and when they're getting outraged. And he is using this to his own advantage. And Drew asked us the question, should any one person control more wealth than a country's GDP, than its gross domestic product? Should they have that kind of money? Well, we can look back to Morgan and his ability to bail out the entirety of the American economy. We can go back to Nicholas Biddle, and we can look at the power that he had over the American economy and Andrew Jackson's concerns. And then we look, very recently to one of the Facebook workers, Frances Haugen, who testifies before Congress. She says, I am here today because I believe Facebook products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy. So again, I think that all of these people that we've been discussing, what they all have in common is this tremendous economic power that goes beyond economic power. Whenever you have that amount of monetary strength and you have a taste for monetary gain, you also have power over society, you have power over humanity, and you often, as a result, impact government and democracy itself. And can't we add to this contemporary list? There are other people who have more money, and maybe they have more influence than Zuckerberg does. I mean, Facebook is a pretty influential social media tool, but certainly Amazon's Jeff Bezos has tremendous impact to change the way that Americans do business, to change the way that we live our lives. He creates a new way of buying in America, a digital marketplace. He possesses remarkable economic power over the companies that want to utilize Amazon's network. His net worth is 177.5 billion US dollars, and he doggedly opposes unions, much like Henry Ford. Bezos once said, there are two kinds of companies, those that work to raise prices and those that work to lower them. Well, there have been a lot of criticism of the amount of money that Bezos makes. He once said, entrepreneurs must be willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time. And again, we could superimpose this over a lot of different entrepreneurs throughout American history. And then I was sort of searching around for some things on Bezos to see what some major critics and social commentators have said. And so I grabbed these two quotes. And one of them was, if Jeff Bezos gave all 876,000 Amazon employees a $105,000 bonus, he'd be left with exactly as much money as he had at the start of the pandemic. And then another critic said, there are 7.7 billion people in the world. Jeff Bezos could literally end world poverty and give everyone $1 billion, and he would still have 170 billion left. Well, we can move beyond Bezos. And I left Jeff Bezos' name up there. I should have put Elon Musk. My first mistake in the PowerPoint. I'm sure that Steve Hudspeth will give me down marks for this. But Elon Musk, again, another very, very influential, wealthy entrepreneur, founder of Tesla, SpaceX, and really, truly an entrepreneurial thinker of the 21st century. He has argued widely for saving the species and the planet, that much of what he works on is, he argues, for the benefit of humanity. His net worth is $277 billion. Just in 2021, he added $121 billion to his net worth. And one of his famous quotes is, my motivations for all of my companies has been to be involved in something that I thought would change the world. And some have criticized the fact that Tesla doesn't really make that much money, and that it's really a tax dodge for him to hide money. And so he's fairly well known for making some wild Twitter claims. And there's a particular article that I thought was interesting by a guy named David Adkin, and he called it "The Evolution of Elon Musk: The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly." And throughout the article, he writes, these whole sections of things that Musk has done, and he talks about the good he's done, the bad he's done, and then some of the ugly. And not much of the ugly was there. I had, I'm certainly no expert on Elon Musk, but I was looking around and I did a bit of trolling to see, what's the worst stuff that is said about Musk. And Adkin concludes this way in his article. He goes, Elon cares about one thing above all else: saving our species. He cares so much about this that it doesn't matter if people think he's a jerk. To him, the greater good is more important than one individual's feelings, even his family's. So at the end of the day, I have to say that Elon Musk is a jerk, but he's also an innovative jerk that we should aspire to be. And I think, again, you could say this of a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people who are sort of aristocrats in their taste. And, we have to recognize that Musk comes, he doesn't come from the same kind of privileged background that that Bezos does or that Zuckerberg does. He really is a self-made man. And not that these others too don't do a lot of self-making for themselves and make great fortunes in their own rights. But Musk is, when you get people like this who really truly are geniuses, and I think Musk is, and I think Bezos is in a lot of ways, and certainly Zuckerberg is in a lot of ways. They are quirky and aristocratic and eccentric and can come off as jerks. But so we I tried to bring you all the way, give you a little bit of background of what we've talked about over these last many weeks, and then bring you full scale to the future. And now I am going to hurl you back to the beginning of what we think of as modern economics, because I think we need to dig into and think a little bit about really what is the meaning of what we would refer to as modern economics or modern capitalism. And the person who is often credited with this is Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. And he wrote this multi-volume work. The short title of it is The Wealth of Nations, but it's an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. And the essential Smith, what does he say? He says, consumption is the sole end and purpose of all production. So it's all about consumption, which means that it's all about supply and demand. He says, it is not from the benevolence or kindness of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. So they're not doing things. No person who's producing is doing it out of the benevolence of their own heart. They're doing it for their own personal gain. It's from their own self-interest. Then he says, it is the maxim of every prudent master of a family never to attempt to make at home what it will cost him more to make than to buy. And so this concept takes us away from the idea of a barter-oriented economy or a subsistence-oriented economy, which in the most of the 18th century and in the early 19th century for the United States, that's what the United States is. The mass of people in the US are involved in agriculture, and they are really subsistence farmers, and they are making almost everything that they need. If they need something additional that they can't do themselves, perhaps something the blacksmith does, or they need a doctor, or they need a miller to grind their wheat. They are using specialists for that, but they're not engaged in what we would refer to as a modern economic or exchange-based, monetary exchange-based economy. They are engaged in a barter economy. And Smith concludes with all money is a matter of belief, meaning that any sort of means of exchange that we are going to use for a modern economic system is based on our belief in that very economic model. So we could again return to somebody like Andrew Jackson, who didn't like the concept of paper money, yet look at the extent to which paper money becomes such a fundamental element of modern economies today, especially with equivalences of trade that exists, so that you can trade one form of currency from one nation to a different form of currency to another nation. And now look at what's been going on in the last 20 to 30 years. We are very quickly moving away from a paper currency sort of model and move much more towards the credit-oriented model. Not that credit and credit cards hadn't existed long before that, but we were still wedded to our checkbooks, and we were still wedded to actual paper money dollar bills. Whereas now we can walk in with our phone and do Apple Pay, or we can use our credit card and tap, or we can use our Apple Watch and pay that way. Now we've got the rise of cryptocurrency, which is all digital currency that is not based in any sort of paper system at all. And many people today look at that, I'm sure, the way that Jackson looked at paper money, with a real question about what it meant. So Adam Smith, as this father of modern economics, is, I think, central to our larger inquiries over this nature of tycoons, of modern day capitalists. And I say this because his ideas about consumption and production are at the epicenter of modern capitalism today. But there's something else about Adam Smith that we often don't really think about, and many of us often don't know. If you look at the middle of the center of your screen, and it says, nature and causes of the wealth of nations. It says, by Adam Smith, formerly professor of moral philosophy in the University of Glasgow. He's a professor of moral philosophy, writing about economics. Okay? And this is a very, very interesting factor in regards to Adam Smith. He is not just merely writing about economics as a modern day economist would today, about economic models and theories. He is thinking about economics as the best means to a moral society, to having philosophy and morality at the centerpiece of an economic model. And isn't that one of the things that we've been questioning and talking about for the entirety of this series? So I think that that's really fascinating and something that we need to keep in mind, because ever since the creation of more modern economic systems, we have always been striving to find what is the balance between this issue of profit and what's best for the society philosophically and socially. And so we can ask the question, is our economic system that different today than it was years ago in terms of actual motivation? Has the economic system changed? Yes, of course it has, with greater technology and greater capacity to create and produce. Yes, it's changed, but have the motivations of economics changed all that much? Hasn't power and profit always been an element of human society in whatever stage of society it's been? Hasn't power and profit always been the quest for resources? So if we go through the stages of human development and we think about the hunter-gatherer, they are not producing in a massive way for the market, but certainly there is a quest for resources. There is an issue if you're going to talk about the quest and the gaining of resources as profit, which surely they would have viewed it in I think in that way. And then there's power over access to those resources, and there are different clans of hunter-gatherers that try and take away resources from one another. We all understand this concept. And then we move into the pastoral phase, where rather than merely hunting and gathering, we are actually engaged in the husbandmanship of animals. And we are nomadic, but we are keeping herds of animals, and we are not merely sort of subsistence only. We are developing a way to keep ourselves alive and move as tribes to different places. Then we then move into a more settled agricultural period where it moves away from the nomadic, and our technology gets better so that we can produce more agriculture to feed ourselves, in addition to maintaining the domesticated animals. And then ultimately we move to the fourth stage, which is commerce, and then that results in industry. And we can ask ourselves, which of these systems has offered the greatest economic opportunity? And can we not ask, is capitalism the greatest economic system ever devised? Is it the system that has given the greatest opportunity to the greatest number of people? I think that is a worthy question for us to think about in relation to other economic systems and other stages of human development. What are the alternatives? Well, we know some of these because the 20th century, the latter part of the 19th and the better part of the 20th century, for a good solid 100 years or more, was a battle between two great systems. One of them was socialism or communism, as Karl Marx defined it. It was the rising up of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. And so what did Karl Marx have to say about the nature of capitalism with all of the problems that we've spent a lot of time over this 5 weeks discussing? Well, Marx said that capitalism is a chaotic system of production that is beyond the control of humanity, and that while it raised human productive capacity higher than any time before, it is doomed to plunge society into ever greater crises. He insisted that it was the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, said that the working class is exploited by the ruling class, that the condition of workers could not improve as long as profit was accumulated by private capitalists, that workers had to rise up and overthrow capitalism and the very nature of the rule of private property, so that rather than capitalism and private property and profit as the centerpiece of the economic system, that communalism, that everyone receiving the same, that an essential economic equality had to exist, that governments, in fact, had to control all means of production to create the fairest, the most humane society. This was, socialism. Marx's ideas of socialism and capitalism are born of the very problems that capitalism created, right? Well, we know that communism fails. And I love this quote, and we're getting into these heady theories of all these great men, and I think I can put Frank Zappa in as one of these great men. He says communism doesn't work because people like to own stuff, and isn't that the truth? Communism fails for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, this is not a talk about the failures of communism, right? But I think we can list a few things. One of the great problems of communism that does, in fact, destroy individualism and the very nature of liberty. It's opposition. It's in opposition to human nature and the competitive spirit, the very idea that human beings want to compete on multiple levels, and that communism creates a false equivalency among people, that there is often little motivation to work hard. Why would you work harder? Why would you risk more of yourself if you cannot profit from it, if you cannot achieve something more than what someone else does? That communism ultimately becomes, for these reasons, communism becomes economically unproductive, that the lack of competition lessened ingenuity and risk-taking for new ideas and products. And so that a communist economic system is just simply not as adept and not as able to make production changes and to develop new concepts and new ideas in business as is the capitalist model. Well, what else are the alternatives? If socialism and communism can't be the answer to capitalism, what is? Well, I think we already have had the answer to this, and we've had the answer to it for a long, long time when capitalism first becomes really problematic. And so we have to go back to our old friend Teddy Roosevelt, because I think he understood what the problem was. He was not anti-business, but he was pro-society. He believed in reform and not revolution. He believed in regulation, but not renegade economics. He believed in a progressive era, in a progressive government. And we can ask the question, is this democratic socialism? If socialism is the act of government getting involved in business in any way, and especially in Roosevelt's view, through regulation, is that the very definition of democratic socialism? Is that what progressivism was in the late 19th and very late 19th, but in the early 20th century? Is that what it was? And Roosevelt at one point says, there once was a time in history when the limitation of governmental power meant increasing liberty for the people. And this was the foundations of small r republicanism, of a republic. And then he says, in the present day, the limitation of governmental power, of governmental action, means the enslavement of the people by the great corporations. So I'm struck by this quote because Roosevelt understood that he was not merely increasing the power of government for power in its own right, but in actuality to balance and protect society, to maintain and sustain a liberty-loving, democratic economic system. He further says, we are not attacking the corporations, but endeavoring to do away with any evil in them. We are not hostile to them. We are merely determined that they shall be so handled as to subserve the public good. We draw the line against misconduct, not against wealth. And again, I think that this is right. And I think it actually fits with what Adam Smith's ideas were about moral philosophy as well. That it's not about being antagonistic and oppositional to capitalism as an economic system. It's not in opposition to people who are willing to work harder, who are smarter, who are more risk-taking. They should be able to make more money than other people. It's not simply about creating Marxian communism where everybody gets the same thing, but it is about ameliorating the problems that can develop. And this means, and because of these new, the new technology and the new systems, and take Zuckerberg, for example, how could we know a platform like Facebook when it first comes out, and it's really just sort of a social media platform where people are sharing pictures and things that they did during the day and connecting with old friends. How could we know when it first comes out that it's going to become this social and political juggernaut that needs regulating? And this is going to be the nature of human society as long as we continue to invent and create new product and create new ideas. We are going to find out they need to have a certain license to figure out where they will go and what they're going to do. So we can't immediately regulate them because we don't know what their impact are going to be. But we have to at least accept that after a certain period of time, we will in fact learn what the problems are, and we shouldn't be entirely hostile to ameliorating some of those problems. And then finally, one of the quotes from Roosevelt that I really liked was, "The great corporations, which we have grown to speak of rather loosely as trusts, are the creatures of the state. And the state not only has the right to control them, but it is in duty bound to control them wherever the need of such control is shown. There is clearly need of supervision, need to possess the power of regulation of these great corporations through the representatives of the public. And so I asked you the question, is this democratic socialism? Is socialism, or is it better, should we better call it progressivism? I think progressivism is more palatable, because socialism has, for such a long period of time, it's so connected to communism, it's got such a negative connotation to it. And I'm constantly seeing in our political environment, people bandying about the socialist name, the socialist term, and saying that socialism is terrible, all socialism is awful. And I think that most of those people wouldn't really be able to define socialism if you challenged them on it. And I think that we are not in this day and age talking about Marxian or communist socialism. We're talking about something very, very different. So I will finish with this slide. Let's take a look at this. Democratic socialism in Norway versus United States unfettered capitalism. Poverty rate in Norway is 10%. In the United States, it's 29%. Life expectancy is fairly close, 81.7 years in Norway, 79.6 years in the United States. Infant mortality, 2 per 1,000 versus 5.7 in the United States. But now it really starts to change. Murder rate, 0.51 per 100,000. Murder rate in the United States, 4.74 per 100,000. Incarcerations, 74 per 100,000. United States, 860 per 100,000. GDP, 75.500 per person versus 59.5 per person in the United States. 70% of workers in Norway are protected by unions. 11.3% of workers are protected in the United States. Norway ranks as the second happiest country, the United States 14th. Norway, free universal health care. United States, I don't need to tell you that we've been arguing about healthcare forever. And if any time should show you that we need some sort of real healthcare system, I think a worldwide pandemic will tell us this. Norway, free higher education. U.S. expensive higher education. The college debt crisis. It literally any time could become the next great economic crisis, equal to the housing crisis that brought down the economy in 2008. I mean, we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars that students have been spending. In Norway, financial security for seniors, no security for seniors in the United States. I've been thinking with inflation, I've been thinking about my own retirement. I'm a long way away from it, but with this level of interest that we have been, or inflation, that we've been seeing, I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to retire, right? 83% home ownership in Norway, 63% home ownership in United States. Living wage as a minimum, poverty wage as a minimum. 8 weeks paid vacation per year. United States, I don't think it's no paid vacation per year. Many companies do have it, but many companies don't. 35 weeks paid parental leave. No paid parental leave in the United States. Though there have been some recent laws that have been changing this, but it's a real problem. The average personal tax rate in Norway, 38.52%. Average personal tax rate in the United States, 37%. There's a lot we could play with these percentages. So I mean, these, I think, place in stark contrast concepts of democratic socialism in some countries versus the arguments that we have over government regulation and whether or not these are handouts, whether they're not handouts, how do they impact our society, our economy. And so that is my last slide. So I will end there, and then let's see what's out there in the question world. Max, you back with us, my friend?
Yes, I am. I'm trying to get my camera up here.
So I have a question. Oh my goodness. I have a question from Steve Hudspeth. Adam Smith famously also said that where competitors gather together, conspiracies to fix prices may be expected to result, and he condemned such gatherings as susceptible to creation of monopolies. He was therefore in that regard a strong advocate of what would much later be termed antitrust regulation. Do you think that the answer to regulating modern tycoons is still a function of antitrust policy, as in J.P. Morgan and Carnegie's time, and though much, if not all, of the 20th century, or instead lies in some other form of government regulation, privacy regulation, limits on massive wealth accumulation, or some other type of regulation? In short, how does progressivism work itself out on the ground today? What would TR do? I'm always disappointed with Steve because he asks these just mundane questions that, Steve. Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think we need a new progressivism. I think we need to get away from this label of socialism because it's toxic. I think progressivism is the right term, though that's to change the terms is easier said than done. But I also do, in fact, think that we need some sort of limits on massive wealth accumulation. Now, in saying that, I want to be careful about that because I think that people who are able to amass, really significant wealth and be able to do with it as they want, they are often the entrepreneurs who make major change in human society and in technology. I mean, look what's going on with both Bezos and Elon Musk with space technology. I mean, I think that's a pretty remarkable thing that potentially has value to it. But I think that the basic element of it should be is, everybody should have to pay taxes, first of all. There shouldn't be, any outs. One of the things that these very, very wealthy people do in order to avoid, how do they manage to avoid paying any personal income tax? Because they don't take a salary, right? What they do is their credit is so good, they live off of their credit, right? So, and they're always to pay off the credit because they do in fact have more credit, right? They're never going to run out of money. So they're not actually taking any income, so they don't pay any income tax. This has got to stop. There has to be, I would argue that there should be some sort of flat tax that's put in place, that everybody is paying a certain percentage rate. I mean, this is one of the things that and I'm blanking on his name, who is Berkshire Hathaway.
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett has argued so often that, how is it that his secretary can be paying a higher tax rate than he in fact is paying? I mean, that's just ludicrous. So I don't think that we should create a cap where people aren't able to make great fortunes. I think, if you have, like I said, if you are smarter, if you work harder, if you are willing to risk more, you should be able to gain more. But how much more becomes the question. Should there be some sort of, there's been an argument that there should be some sort of direct tie between the amount that the CEO makes versus what the lowest paid person at a company makes, right? And so, one of the problems with CEO, payment plans, we especially saw this in the 1990s with all these, crazy pay schemes with, and this is what brought us to WorldCom and Enron and, giving CEOs not just huge salaries, but giving them huge stock options that their primary motivation is to raise the stock value by any means necessary. And they become fabulously wealthy as a result of this, but they engage in chicanery and cooking the books in order to do it. And so we've got to, I think, change the way that some CEOs are paid. So, I mean, I don't think there's a one-step solution, But I also don't think that we haven't thought of all the things that need to be done, right? It's a matter of actually getting people on board to do something about it. And that's the more difficult thing. And we are living in a society that is so polarized. And what is remarkable to me is that so many people are involved in political organizations that those organizations do not have the best interest of the people who belong to the party, at heart. So, do we have other questions? We only had one question come in, and that was from our friend Steve. What else should we talk about, Max?
Well, I really appreciated the overall focus of your talk, Matt, especially how you gave us a primer on basic economics, going back to the very father of economic theory, rather than necessarily focusing on the personalities of these individuals that we've been talking about in our series. My question to you would be, it's so true that we are terribly divided, and there doesn't seem to be political will to effectuate the kinds of regulatory changes that you're suggesting might be beneficial to society, and which I agree with you on. What do you think what's your prognosis? I mean, going forward, is there an opportunity in American society for there to be some kind of harmonious coming together and solving these problems? I mean, we've done it before, and can we do it again?
I don't have my magic 8-ball with me, Max. But I think if I did and I rolled it around, I think the little triangle would pop up in the bubble and say, it is unlikely. And that's disappointing. I mean, I think as a nation, we have a remarkable resiliency that resides within us, and an amazing ability to reinvent ourselves. And that is true both socially, culturally, and economically. But what I have seen over the last really 30 years has been extremely disconcerting. And I believe, I don't want to get too partisan here, but I believe that it begins with the Newt Gingrich conservative revolution and the advent of the Tea Party, and I don't really think I'm actually being partisan. Newt Gingrich has been, is in fact very forthright in regards to what his ideology and his goals were for a new Republican Party when he started really advocating in the 1990s. He's given plenty of interviews about this, and he's quite outspoken that his belief was that the Republican Party had spent, this is in the 1980s, in the Reagan conservative era, that they had spent far too much time compromising with the Democratic Party, and that was good, that was bad for Republicans, that they were not winning the way that they should have, and that he believed that a more strident and more antagonistic style of party politics was needed. He helped to usher that in. I think that what we've seen in terms of the level of antagonism and animosity that exists in American society today is the full-born result of that very specific strategy. I know that Newt Gingrich believed that he was saving American society as a result of that, and his goal was to move away from what he believed was socialism. I think that I don't agree with his goals in this regard, but then when you have that level of antagonism rising in American society, and then you have the 2008 presidential election where it's a very fraught election. And I would say what I'm about to say, no matter who ended up becoming president. I believe the Supreme Court overstepped its constitutional power in making a decision. I think that the Constitution is very, very clear on what happens if all electoral votes cannot be counted and no one has won the full number, that it devolves to the House of Representatives, and that's the way that it gets settled. I think had that happened, I still think George W. Bush would have become president of the United States, but that creates, that exacerbates this tension that is already developing. And then in the immediate aftermath, and this is what I've been working on for the last, 7-8 years, then you get 9/11. And it throws the United States into a different kind of chaos. It throws us into a very deep economic chaos, and it throws us into a security chaos. And the United States under, the George W. Bush administration and under neocons, they go in a direction that I really don't think the United States should have gone in, and that is in particular in regards to Iraq. And, it really has had incredibly negative impacts, not only in the United States, that it again has exacerbated these partisan divisions, but it's had incredibly negative impacts throughout the world with, the largest refugee. We've heard a lot about it, the refugee crisis out of Ukraine. And I've heard a lot of commentators saying, this is the largest refugee crisis since World War II. And, I don't know what they're smoking, because the greatest refugee crisis since World War II has been from the Middle East and from refugees moving into Europe and into the European Union. That's created a massive crisis in Europe and in Northern Africa over the question of the other moving in, and it's resulted in a rise in fascism and a rise in very dangerous nationalism. We've seen the same thing in our own country, and so a lot of things have come to a head, and I'm just not sure how we back away from where we are right now. I don't know. And I sort of look at COVID and I think to myself, if ever there should have been a thing that should have brought Americans together, a pandemic that its source comes from no political motivation, it comes from no economic motivation, it comes from no military motivation. Let's assume and let's accept that COVID was, it was an accident, right? That it was a naturally occurring thing, that it wasn't some sort of Chinese weaponized, plague, but that it was in fact, nature. If anything should have brought the United States and the world together, it should have been that. For us to understand that we are all in this together.
Tragically, we failed. I mean,
we failed.
We had a higher rate of unvaccinated people, a higher death rate, in comparison with other developed nations. It was completely tragic what ended up happening with that.
So exactly my point. So if that can't bring us together, if something that is so nonpartisan or should be nonpartisan, a germ, if that can't bring us together and realize that we need government regulation, that we need government health care, that we need, if that doesn't do it, I don't know what will. And unfortunately, when we look at history, great cultural shifts most often occur as either a result of war or as a result of great economic catastrophe. And quite often, those two come hand in hand. So I don't want to end on a downer here, but
we've got a couple more questions that will give
sure.
you a chance to shift away from that negative assessment, Matt.
So
Let's take-
Francie,
Yeah,
thanks, Max. So Francie says, as federal financing of all federal elections begin to chip away at the dialing for dollar syndrome of especially ambitious members of Congress who covet the vice chair title and its accompanying power? Yes, absolutely. And I think there's no question about that, that we have to have much greater federal financing, and we have to have much more regulation of financing, and we have to take away the two mainstream political parties' powers over the national parties and how elections take place and how debates take place. I would actually argue, and I've been arguing this for a long time, I think we're in the process of a major relocation of our political party system. I think we've been on the road to this for quite some time. I think the Republican Party has been in a process of disintegration for quite some time. It is certainly not the Republican Party of 30 years ago. You can make the same argument of the Democratic Party, right? But I would love to see, I think we need a new constitutional convention. I think we need to create a system where no single political party can have a full majority. I think we have to have a forced third party system that literally forces compromise to take place inside of Congress. It's the only way that we get business done. Steve asks, with respect to Max's excellent question, each time in our examples for this series, as you summarize them so well, Matt, it has required extraordinary presidential leadership to bring about progressive change. Andrew Jackson, TR, FDR. What are the odds of such a leader emerging now, given our present methods of choosing candidates? Not very likely. And this again is one of the problems of our political system and the power that the two parties have over the actual electoral process. Most Americans don't realize just how important it is to be part of the primary process. We must change this system because the people who are most involved always represent the most extreme views on both sides of the political spectrum. And so we're getting these candidates that are just, they're too radical. I don't personally think that Biden is too radical. He's certainly not radical enough for much of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I think he was a moderate choice by Democrats because they thought he could take the temperature down. And I think he has taken the temperature down to a certain degree. But, personally, I'll just tell you my personal opinion. I would love to see Joe Biden come out and say that he's not running again. I think he's done a decent job. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of problems with the economy, but I don't think you can pin a lot of these economic problems directly on Joe Biden. There's a little thing called a pandemic that has occurred. So I think there's a big problem with that. All the arguments about, what he did or didn't do with Afghanistan to me are just absolute and utter garbage. I don't think there's a thing he could have done to change the outcome of Afghanistan. But I don't think that he's a particularly inspiring figure. And I would like every baby boomer in Congress to retire. I think it's time for a new generation to come to the fore, and we need I think more young people. They're starting to get more involved in politics and seeing the need for engagement, and it's time to pass the torch, I think.
well, Matt, I see that we do not have any further questions, and I want to thank you again on behalf of our committee and our audience for being with us again. Really a wonderful treat to have you and to listen to your lecture today. So much to think about.
There's a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Michael, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Well, I just want to thank Matt for a great presentation and tying it all together and then extending beyond what we had even in the four sort of primary lectures of the series. It was a very good wrap up and extension. Some So good questions at the end. As you said, a lot to think about. Thanks, Max, for doing a great job on the moderating. I just want to thank all of our sponsors and thank all of our speakers. I think it turned out to be a great series. And also thank you folks in the audience who have, many of you, I see the names, many of you have been to all 5 of these. I hope you got a lot out of it. I'm looking forward to working with the Historical Society, probably starting late in the summer, to put together next year's series. And we'll look forward to doing it and look forward to seeing you all again. Have a nice rest of the day. It's still beautiful out. And thanks again, Matt and Max.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.